with PPF, Peninsula Pride Farms, the Nature Conservancy, and DATCAP to talk about some of the conservation practices that PPF has been doing in the field and some survey data to show the results of those practices and how valuable they've been. If we can, a couple of housekeeping things. I see a lot of you have your cameras turned off, which is good, and you'll be muted. We're going to start with Don, who will introduce himself and give a couple of remarks. Then we'll go to Steve Richter, and then we'll go to Dana. And then when we're done with the three of those, we'll open it up for questions from the media. So Don, if you can, let's start off.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I'm Don Niles. I'm a dairy farmer and veterinarian in the northern part of Kewaunee County on Dairy Dreams and Pagels Ponderosa Family Dairy. I've been working with the Pagel family for over 20 years, and became interested about 5 years ago in 2016 in finding a new way to engage with the non-farm public. As a group of farmers, we had a meeting to discuss the challenges that we saw in farming and environmentally improved practices. And it was a very good meeting, but we also realized that to move ahead, it was important to us as a group to say not only were we committed to improvements, but we were also acknowledging that we as the leaders in agriculture were also having an impact on the environment that we had to be aware of and apply ourselves to also improving as we went. So we decided to start a group of crop and dairy and beef farmers in Kewaunee and Southern Door County who aligned in the notion that we were proud of what we were doing and committed to finding better and better ways to do it. And B, we felt that the community would support that endeavor, in that we felt the public believed that agriculture and farms should be here in the peninsula, but they also believed that agriculture should be responsible and not creating environmental problems in the peninsula. And with those two fundamental notions, we went ahead and created the organization called Peninsula Pride Farms, where as farmers we could work together between farms and together with professional support such as Discovery Farms, DATCAP, the resources available to us, along with private resources such as the Nature Conservancy, to fund and promote efforts for local farmers to experiment with improved environmental management and take some of the risk away for trying new practices.
Thank you, Don. We will pass it on to Steve Richter now for some comments.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Richter. I work for the Wisconsin chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and I work on our agricultural projects, like the project we're talking about today with Don's group. And so briefly on the Nature Conservancy, we're a conservation organization's been working in Wisconsin for over 60 years. Work globally across 73 different countries across the globe. We got our start 60 years ago protecting land, protecting places that citizens of Wisconsin or citizens from other states in their states, they felt were really important, special places. And we continue to do that type of work across Wisconsin, whether they're old growth forest in the north or remnant prairies in the south, wetlands. And this past year has really, I think, shown the value of having such places for people, not just nature, but boy, with the pandemic, people have really been out on public lands and lands owned by the Conservancy, hiking, especially this time of year, skiing, snowshoeing. And so these places are important, really important. However, we also realized probably now for the last 15 or 20 years, really to address these challenges of that face the people of the globe, whether it's climate change or providing food for a growing population, or making a better connection between nature and people living in urban areas. We at the Nature Conservancy have to expand our work, and so for the last 10 years I've really taken it upon myself to solely work on the opportunities involving with agriculture, and realizing that we, and collectively, farmers, citizens of Wisconsin, we really need agriculture to be prosperous and to be resilient and to be sustainable. And how can the Nature Conservancy really help make that happen? And so I really appreciate the opportunities of working with Don and groups like Peninsula Pride, because I feel one of the most significant ways we can make that impact is by having the people closest to the land, the farmers working in their communities, really be the leaders and being engaged and feel valued in those conversations. So it's definitely not a top-down approach to conservation, but rather bottoms up. And let's work with the people who know best. Let's make them feel they're part of the decision making. And that's what this project is all about. And as Dana will describe, this is just one of countless other grassroots efforts across Wisconsin that are really blossoming and having an impact.
All right, thank you, Steve. And now we'll turn it to Dana, who's going to cover a couple of key points from the press release that was embargoed and sent out yesterday. Go ahead, Dana.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve, and good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Crystal. I am a conservation specialist with the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, oftentimes referred to as DATCAP. So DATCAP implements and manages the Producer-Led Watershed Protection Program statewide. And of course, the Peninsula Pride Farm Group is a part of that program. So before kind of getting into some of the details of the examples we'll talk about today, I just kind of wanted to set the stage for this project. So when we think about water quality improvement and connections to the different processes happening on farm fields, a lot of times we're thinking about soil erosion and phosphorus loss from the fields. Both soil and phosphorus is much more valuable on the farm fields, as we all know. So taking steps to evaluate those metrics is all part of this process. So now I will ask you to turn your attention to the graphic that should be displayed on the screen to kind of help supplement some of the things that I'll be talking about. So for this survey and evaluation, we used SNAP Plus, which is a nutrient management planning software. And we modeled conservation practices on the dominant soil types of this area, and then extrapolated the results from these different models to practice numbers that were reported by the Peninsula Pride membership surveys. So I just want to point out that these are not measured reductions. They are, again, modeled, and they're based off of common cropping systems of the farmers in this area. So they help us inform what may be possible, but again, they are not actual measured reductions in the water bodies. So if we look at dairy farms in this area, for example, if we're looking at, say, a typical or a conventional dairy operation that has a rotation with corn silage and alfalfa and utilizes a lot of fall chisel plowing. With the integration of rye cover crops after the corn silage years in the rotation, we might see something as much of a potential reduction of 50% in soil erosion and a 40% reduction in phosphorus loss from the fields. So if we apply that to the 360 acres of cover crops planted of participating dairy farms in the Peninsula Pride Farm Group, From the graphic, we can see there that that could result in a potential soil erosion reduction of 326 tons in 1 year and 422 pounds of phosphorus. So if we move on to a continuous corn operation, again, where that's utilizing alternating rye forage to corn silage year after year, and utilizing chisel plowing and disking as a way to, prep the fields, as many farmers do. With the transition to a no-till implement, we might experience as much of a 60% reduction in phosphorus loss from the field, or as high as 80% reduction in soil erosion. And so if we apply that to the over 300 acres of reported no-till practices in continuous corn systems in this area, we might experience as much as a 958-ton reduction in soil erosion and over 1,300 pounds of phosphorus from the field, reduction of phosphorus loss from the field. And then to touch on the third example here, where we're looking at cash crop rotations, and a traditional system in this area might look like corn, soybeans, and winter wheat, again, utilizing some fall chisel plowing, and maybe some spring cultivation. With the switch to using a strip till planter instead of some of those other tillage implements, we could experience as much of a 70% reduction in soil erosion and a 55% reduction in phosphorus loss from the field. And so extrapolating that out to the 700 acres that were reported in the survey from the membership on cash grain operations, that could result in over 800 tons of soil erosion reduction and around 1,000 pounds of reduction in phosphorus loss. So again, these are all just modeled numbers, but again, they can inform some of the positive things that we might experience. So now I would like to just touch a little bit on practices more generally. So since the inception of this group in 2016, starting out, their reported cover crops were around 4,000 acres on 17 farms, and in the past several years that has grown to over 10,000 acres of cover crops planted across 28 farms. Another example for no-till acres, there's over 3,800 acres across 20 farms in the year of 2016. And that has grown to over 8,000 acres on 28 farms in 2020. And then the last example that I just wanted to highlight was for split nitrogen applications, which can result in a more efficient use of nitrogen fertilizer on farms. Starting out, the reported number was over 14,000 acres on 18 farms. That increased to 25,000 acres across 26 farms. So I just share those numbers to illustrate that practice adoption is increasing in this area. Conservation practice adoption is increasing. There, of course, is still work to do, as might be evidenced by some ongoing water quality issues. But I think this just highlights the importance of kind of supporting and further advancing these farmer-led efforts to support them and in innovating even beyond their current efforts. So with that, I'll turn it back to Steve.
All right, thank you, Dana. I want to thank Don and Steve and Dana for introducing themselves and giving some background information. At this time, let's open it up for any questions for the three of them from the media. If you can, unmute yourself and then you can ask your question.
Hi, this is for Don, I think, probably. This is Chris Clough from the Kewaunee County Star News and Door County Advocate. In implementing these practices that we're talking about, I think if you're a small independent farmer, one of the first things you're going to ask is, what's it going to cost me? So can you, I don't know if you can put a hard number on it. I'm not necessarily expecting that, but can you talk a little bit at least about the expense that farmers would incur in implementing these practices versus doing what they're doing right now?
Yes, Chris, I can. We originally looked at both our membership dues structure and our board composition to make sure that as an organization we included both large and small farms on the board in the leadership positions, and also the availability for cost sharing. And in fact, we set up so that the cost for a small farm to join Peninsula Pride Farms is about 1/5 of what they could derive from cost sharing that same year. So in other words, for a smaller farm, it's a tremendous return. You get your dues back 5 times over with cost sharing if you take advantage of it. And with the larger farms, it's close to 1-to-1 ratio of the cost share versus the cost of membership. That we did deliberately so that we could include as many people that wanted to do as many practices and innovate together as possible. What the cost share we find actually does for people is it doesn't pay for the entire practice of, say, a cover cropping or strip tilling or maybe mitigation around a sinkhole, but it helps reduce the cost or reduce the risk of trying that new practice to the farm. And really, that's, I think, what our members are looking for. Our members already are looking for ways to improve their operations. They're committed to continuous improvement. But if we can take a little bit of the risk away from trying something new, especially in a year like 2019 with the continuous rains, where you could have the best plans in the world and try to get the cover crop in as well as possible, but still run into challenges just from Mother Nature. We help to mitigate the risk to that farm of spending that money to try the new practice. What we also find is that our members don't tend to do the same thing with their cost share year after year. Once they found a way to get cover crops in and make them work on their operation, that reduces the risk to them and they're comfortable continuing to do that. Now they're looking for other things like soil depth determination or the strip tilling or split nitrogen applications. They're looking for something new to try next year and take away the risk there. Really, the cost share is a way to encourage new practices and let them run onward with lower risk. But we did try to structure so that the smaller farms have an even greater benefit than the large farms in terms of return on their dues money.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Don and Steve, this is Tim Coles from DoraCountyDailyNews.com. I know it's probably pretty hard to compare these numbers to other producer-led watershed groups across the state, but maybe just looking specific to your numbers, is this about where you thought that what you thought you'd be able to accomplish in these first 5 years, or is it a little less or a little bit more than what you had expected?
Maybe I could start that, and Steve, if you'd like to follow up, that would be great. Yeah. I would say personally, Tim, as you probably know from previous conversations, we've been thrilled with the response from the membership farms and the aggression that they've shown in going after these new practices and trying new things. I would say the numbers that we're seeing after 5 years of adopted environmental practices is far beyond what we even anticipated with our wishful thinking at the beginning of starting the organization. Once again, we found that once people try these new practices, they become their own established practices and they move on to the next thing. So we're basically blowing out of the water the original goals that we had for cooperation and improvements.
This is Steve Richter. What I could add to that is, well, one point is that it's wonderful to see these outcomes. That I really appreciate groups like Peninsula Pride being really willing to track outcomes, to really demonstrate to the public that they want to know if they're making a difference. And so, and this group is, the cover crop acres in itself is incredible. 18,000 acres in 2020 of cover crops from this group. And cover crops is a really critical conservation practices to build soil health, reduce environmental impacts. And what these groups like Peninsula Pride are doing is really demonstrating a way forward that these practices can benefit the livelihood of farmers and improve the sustainability of the farms. And in turn, what can and will happen is that farmers all across Wisconsin, whether they're a member of this group or not, will adopt such practices at the scale that's really, really needed to really, I guess, build and have a more sustainable agricultural system in our state. And so we're at the forefront of that change. And I think the change is rapid in groups like Peninsula Pride and is slowly building on farmers who aren't members of this group or other groups, the 30 or so other groups in the state. But we need to see that change in increased adoption at hundreds of thousands of acres, if not millions of acres of such practices of reduced tillage, no-till farming, cover crops. And thank goodness we have groups like this one leading the way.
Thank you so much. And Steve, real quick to kind of go on that, with some of the other groups that maybe you've done similar projects on with this, what have been those next steps that, maybe after today you say, hey, Don, let's start doing this?
That's a great question. I think it's throwing ideas out at the groups and letting them figure out what's going to work with the group. And my example of that is what is the Nature Conservancy provided this group and 3 other groups an additional $10,000 of cash in 2020 to try something different. And with an incentive program. In this case, Peninsula Pride said, let's try to reach out to people who aren't members, farmers who aren't members, and give this incentive for them to try cover crops on those fields. And sure enough, it worked. We got seven non-members to utilize that $10,000 and, give it a go. And that's what I look to see, the groups coming up with such ideas. And maybe the ideas in this group or other groups would be like, hey, what can we do to stimulate something else via some incentive program where possibly in the future that might be building soil carbon. Soil carbon could be a really incredible, it'd be really incredible for society to have soil carbon built up across soils all across North America and the globe to really reduce, be a natural solution to climate change. And in doing so, if we can demonstrate, a successful administration of such program, there could be then an increased revenue source coming to farmers like this to really demonstrate that they are some part of the natural solutions we really need to address these global challenges.
Thank you.
If I could add to Steve's answer just a little bit, what Steve and his organization are great at doing is moving the goalposts on us a little bit each year and putting a further challenge out there. And for a group that's committed to continuous improvement, that's exactly what we need. We're not looking for status and being in a static situation of simply doing next year what we did last year. And the Nature Conservancy has been very creative in coming up with ways to stimulate new practices beyond what we did last year. And this example of the extra donation they gave us this year to be applied to, as we did in this case, new members, was exactly the example of how they do that. A little extra funding and a little creativity, and we've got 7 new members and a more energized organization than we had the year before even. as farmers on
Don, this is
Kewanee,
Steve from DBA. A question for you, maybe. Sorry, go ahead.
As farmers located specifically in Kewanee and Southern Door, I wouldn't say that we're insulated, but we know what we know here. The outside groups like Nature Conservancy and the NRCS with our demo farms program are basically putting yeast into the mixture. They're putting energy and driving creativity on our part, and that I think has been a tremendous combination.
Mm-hmm.
So a question for Don. This is Steve from DBA. The relationship you had with the Nature Conservancy and DACAP, obviously there's a great benefit to it. From your perspective, why is it important to maybe do this press conference today, or to reach out to the public in Door and Kewanee County to get them to understand that what you guys are doing is important in the fields, and the consumer today is becoming more aware of, where their food is coming from. Why is it important as a farmer to get them to understand that you guys care about the land and the water and your animals, to get them to see everything that you're doing as a benefit?
Well, we owe it to them. That's the agreement that we had with the non-farming public, is we acknowledge that that they wish us to be here, but we also acknowledge that they wished us to do things better than we had in the past, and continuously do so. So they deserve a report card. They deserve to know, are we just talking about better practices, or even in tough years like 2019, are we committed to those practices and making those improvements? What I love about the metrics or the measurements that we've come up with this year is we can demonstrate, as Dana mentioned, this is not an actual measurement of sediment loss or non-loss, but it's a scientifically based projection based on previous practices and the new practices that have been confirmed. So basically, we're giving our neighbors, our non-farming neighbors, a report card of how we're doing, what we're doing with their environmental integrity in mind, and the feedback we get from the non-farming public has been tremendous. People commenting about green fields in November when they're not used to seeing that. Those are fun things to hear. People talking about better well tests, or less algae, things that non-farming people can see on a daily basis, are exactly the kind of things we're looking forward to being able to demonstrate more and more.
Don, one more question I have is, if you go back, let's say 10 years, maybe 15, and you weren't doing cover crops or strip till, did you ever envision that you could get to this point to, like you said, in November, you have green fields. Did you ever envision that you could get to this point and be doing these types of things?
Probably not. The bulk of the farming practices were traditional at that time. You saw a lot of chisel plowing, some moldboard plowing, a lot of practices that had been going on for 2 or 3 generations. I think the rapidity that's at which these changes have occurred in the last 5 years even is mind-boggling. Things look different. If change happens very gradually, people don't tend to notice the change, but things have happened so rapidly that we're hearing comments from people that are just saying, well, why do things look differently out there? Why does the water look cleaner and where they go duck hunting? Just things that they're seeing that they want to talk about. I think that the speed of change has been very rewarding, very exhilarating.
Mm-hmm.
Chris or Tim, do either one of you guys have any more questions for Dana, Steve, or Don?
I think I'm good right now. Thank you.
I guess the only other question I'd have, this one might be for Dana. So we're talking about this as kind of projections moving forward based on the last 5 years. So the numbers that you gave in that graphic are more or less projections. Does that probably doesn't entail, newer practices or things that they've done, within the last year, and how that could have a positive impact moving forward?
Good question. Yeah, so the results from this year are really based off of the practices that have been reported to date, like you mentioned. So that isn't getting at maybe some of these more innovative practices in terms of like tweaking the techniques of how farmers are planting cover crops, for example, or whether maybe they're planting into green growing cover crops. So this doesn't get at some of those finer details of the practice particulars. It really kind of aggregates the practices as a whole. But moving forward, DATCAP is continuing to kind of develop this program-wide tracking project. So for all of the 30 groups throughout the state, we're really trying to kind of further guide the reporting that's coming back to us so that we can get some more detailed results moving forward.
All right, thank you. I think that does it for me, Steve.
All right, thank you. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining and attending today. If there's a need from Tim or Chris for a one-on-one interview for Don or Steve or Dana, reach out to me and we can help facilitate and set that up. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.